Chapter 14. Childhood Sweethearts. Several minutes went by and Sammy was still crying in the bathroom. He didn't like the idea of not only losing his dad, but he didn't like the idea of changing his last name either, after the whole conversation of maiden names. Once he stopped crying, he stood up and walked out of the bathroom and down the hall. He sniffled his nose once he re-entered the front room. "Would you like to hear more about my childhood?" asked Grandma. "I guess so. Yes, please," said Sammy, as soon as he sat back down on the couch in front of the window. "All right," said Grandma. "Where was I?" Said Sammy, scratching his chin. "I think you were saying that you wanted to make friends with other kids, but it just wasn't easy for you." "Oh, yes," said Grandma. "Thank you for reminding me." "You're welcome, Grandma. Anyway, I wanted to join in with other kids, but they wouldn't let me, and the owner was way too busy to help me out with making friends." "The owner?" asked Sammy with curiosity. "Did someone own you?" "No," said Grandma with a grin. "I meant the owner of the orphanage, not an owner of a person." "Is that what orphans call a parent or something like that?" asked Sammy. "I guess you could put it that way," said Grandma thoughtfully. "However, this owner I had at the orphanage wasn't taking good care of us at the time. She wouldn't even let us call her Mom. She preferred to be called Mrs. Dial. She wasn't providing for us or even taking time to get to know us." "Really?" asked Sammy. "Why wasn't she?" "Because all she ever did was paperwork. She didn't bother to help me with my homework and other things I was trying to learn." "Why not?" asked Sammy. "Homework is important." "Back when I was a kid, I didn't understand why adults always said they were too busy to help any of us with what we were struggling with. Most of the time, Mrs. Dial was so stressed out from trying to take care of a lot of orphans, she didn't have anybody else to help her out." "Didn't she let you help?" asked Sammy. "I asked her if I could help, but she was hoping for other adults to help her." "But Grandma," said Sammy, "you're a good helper. Why wouldn't she let you help?" "Mrs. Dial did let me help," said Grandma, "just not the way grown-ups do." "What did she do?" asked Sammy. "What did Mrs. Dial usually do at the orphanage?" "Well," said Grandma, "back then there were a lot of children who lost their parents during the big war. Most of them ended up living at the orphanages. It really stressed Mrs. Dial out to have a lot more children to take care of. In order to take care of all of us, she had to make sure the children stayed out of trouble. She even had to make sure we did our nightly stuff, like brushing our teeth and setting up our beds, pretty much all those things. She did all the things that a mother would do, except for the hugs and kisses." "Oh, man," said Sammy with a groan. He dropped down to his knees and lay flat on his stomach. He crawled on the soft carpet like a chubby bulldog towards his grandma. He crawled up to her. "I don't want a mom who wouldn't give me a hug or kiss," he whined. Grandma wrapped her arms around him. "Oh, Sammy, that's not going to happen to you." Sammy wrapped his arms around his grandmother. "What about Lucy?" asked Sammy. "It's not going to happen to her either. You have a lot of people who love you both so much that they would give you hugs and kisses too." Grandma pressed her lips on Sammy's forehead. "Wow," said Sammy. "Thanks." Sammy and Grandma let go of each other. Sammy sat down in the other rocking chair next to Grandma. "So what you said about Mrs. Dial does sound like a lot of work with that many kids to take care of, right?" It sure was, said Grandma with a slow nod. And you said that she let you help with some other thing? What was it? She asked me to be in charge of having the children help with chores at the orphanage. Did you learn how to do all those things? Asked Sammy. We did, said Grandma, but we couldn't help each other with homework. The orphanage had a strict rule saying that we had to do homework on our own, with no one to help. Was that hard? Asked Sammy. It was for a lot of us, said Grandma. There were some kids who had a hard time understanding basic math and science. Mrs. Dial didn't help anybody with their homework. What happened to her? Asked Sammy. She got so tired of taking care of so many kids that she finally quit. Some people can't take a lot of stress. Stress? Asked Sammy. I'm pretty sure she cared, said Grandma, but she was just so overwhelmed. Is Mom like that? Asked Sammy. Sometimes, said Grandma. Your mom loves you and Lucy. She may be super busy with work at this time and a bit stressed right now, but she tries her best to not let either of you down. Do you have any homework that you need help with? I do, since I haven't done so well on it lately, said Sammy sadly. I just can't do math right, because Dad used to help me with that. Did I hear someone say math? Exclaimed a deep voice. Sammy looked back very quickly to see who was talking. Grandma looked up to see too. Grandpa, said Sammy excitedly, you know about math? Who do you think taught your dad? Asked Grandpa with a wink. Sammy giggled excitedly for the first time in a while. So can you really help me with math? Asked Sammy. I sure can, said Grandpa. Do you need any help? I really do, said Sammy earnestly. But I still want to hear more about what happened with Grandma. I even want to know how you two met. Oh, you do, said Grandpa with a mischievous look in his eyes. Well, I can tell you about how your Grandma and I met. Yay! Sammy cheered. Okay, said Grandma. Will you please sit back on the couch so Grandpa can sit next to me? Oh, said Sammy, quickly standing up from the other rocking chair. Sorry. He dashed back toward the couch in front of the window and sat down expectantly. So you had a hard time making friends with anybody? Yes, Sammy. That's right, said Grandma. That's how I felt when I tried to be friends with Spike's Scarecrow when me, Lucy, Mom, and Dad moved to the new house. But he was trying to act like I wasn't there. I've heard that, said Grandma. But that's not exactly how Mrs. Dial felt about us, although a lot of the kids thought she did. After going through all that stress, I guess she thought we should all deal with stress too. Dealing with stress can be hard, but it's still possible to move on. So, what did you do? Asked Sammy. I just had to be patient and know that everything would be okay, said Grandma. It wasn't long before another owner, Mrs. Hex, took over and told me about the history of my parents. My parents both died from an illness that wasn't treatable, and I ended up in the orphanage. Did you get adopted? Asked Sammy. Yes, said Grandma hesitantly, and no. What do you mean yes and no? Asked Sammy with a confused look. This is where I come in, said Grandpa. How? Asked Sammy. You see, there were happy and sad times. Mrs. Hex treated us with love and support. That was when I could easily make friends. I even met your grandpa at the orphanage. That's right, said Grandpa. Were you an orphan too? Asked Sammy, turning to Grandpa. No, said Grandpa, shaking his head. I was visiting the orphanage with my parents when I was 12, and it turned out that your grandma and I became childhood sweethearts after we met. And I was 10, said Grandma. What's that? Asked Sammy.
What's what? Asked Grandpa.
A childhood sweetheart,
Asked Sammy.
It's a friendship, Sammy, said Grandma. It's when a boy and a girl meet each other and they fall in love.
They're friends at first, said Grandpa quickly, but once they know each other and they grow up together, then their friendship becomes love.
Isn't that kind of weird to a lot of people?
Asked Sammy with a disgusted look.
It is to some, said Grandma, but we didn't care about what other people thought. We just had feelings for each other.
Oh, said Sammy, feeling a bit puzzled. He turned to Grandpa.
So why were you visiting the orphanage?
My parents, my grandparents, and I had a tradition of making quilts and donating them to children in need, especially the orphans.
Quilts?
Asked Sammy.
What's a quilt? It's a special blanket with different patterns of fabric, said Grandma.
The way my family made quilts was tying 2 pieces of fabric together with tiny pieces of yarn, said Grandpa. It was how we could make them nice and warm for cold nights.
How were they warm?
Asked Sammy. We added batting in between the fabric pieces, said Grandpa.
What's batting?
Asked Sammy.
It's cottony stuff, said Grandma. Even your coat has it. You mean that's how it keeps me warm on cold days?
Asked Sammy. Exactly, said Grandpa.
That sounds kind of you, said Sammy. How did the kids feel about the quilts when you gave them to them?
They were a lot warmer, said Grandpa with a smirk.
Okay,
said Sammy, lowering his brow.
Your grandpa was called Willis Kind, as well as he still is today. A lot of the other kids were really interested in meeting a kind boy. They were so grateful for the quilts that his family made. They even mistook his name to be Will is Kind, as a way of saying that he is kind, like they thought just Will was his given name.
So pretty much a lot of the kids, and even Mrs. Hex, were really teasing me in a good way, said Grandpa with a smile.
In a good way? Asked Sammy. I thought teasing was always in a bad way. It can be for some, but not all, said Grandma. Although there are some people who believe in teasing, Grandpa was never ashamed about it.
Nope, said Grandpa. I never was.
But did people ever make you feel bad for losing someone you loved? Asked Sammy. Like what Spike did to me after losing Dad? Lots of people did mean things to me when I was growing up, said Grandma. But that's just part of life. You meet people who are mean to you, and you just have to try to let it go and forgive them. But Spike was mean to me at school, and I didn't like that, said Sammy. I know how that feels, Sammy, said Grandma. But let me tell you, some people are mean to others because they just don't know what they're doing with their lives. Just like you said before that you didn't know what you were doing with yours after losing your dad. It's true, said Sammy with a shrug. But why did Spike try to make it seem like losing my dad was all my fault?
Maybe that kid needs some lessons on being kind, said Grandpa firmly.
I don't know, said Grandma. Maybe Spike was just mean because he didn't know what else to say. Some kids just have a hard time understanding what it's like to be you, and they just don't want to admit that they have problems too. But why don't I see my friends having those problems? I feel like I'm the only kid who's ever lost my dad, said Sammy. It just doesn't seem fair. You're not the only kid in the world who has ever lost someone you truly loved, like a parent, said Grandma. Why do you say that? Asked Sammy. It just feels like I am the only kid who's lost a dad. I bet my friends still have both parents, and they are still together, and they didn't lose them. I see how you feel, Sammy, said Grandma. But if you're certain that your friends didn't lose someone they loved, Have you even asked them? Well, no, said Sammy, feeling an awkward swallow in his throat. Your friends might have similar problems. They just don't like to talk about them. Just like I didn't want to talk about my problems with Mom, Mrs. Oakley, or you when you and Grandpa came? Asked Sammy. Exactly, said Grandma. I see, said Sammy.
Would you like some milk and cookies?
Asked Grandpa. Sammy looked up hungrily. Yes, I would, said Sammy, jumping up from the couch. Grandpa stood up from the rocking chair next to Grandma.
Well, why don't we get some?
He asked. He turned around and walked towards the kitchen, and Sammy quickly followed him with more happiness in his heart than he had felt for a long time.